So hello, welcome back to this edition of the Hospitality Interviews with me, Barry Clark from Dunedin Consultancy. Now, today we're in for a real treat. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Stefan Thomas from the Networking Retreat. Stefan, great to have you with us today. Thanks for making time in your busy schedule. We know each other well. We've been friends and colleagues for a few years now. I suspect a number of people watching this today won't be quite so familiar with you. So, Stefan, tell us a potted history and a little bit about the Networking Retreat.
Firstly, thank you for inviting me on. I talk about networking. That's what I do for a living, and this sort of opportunity to talk to your audience now, Barry, is always valuable for me. So thank you. I know you've put the effort into building your audience. So I'm Stefan. I'm the author of Business Networking for Dummies, as well as a couple of other books as well. And most of what I do as Stefan Thomas is speaking at various events about networking, which is where you and I first met, I think, at Expo Scotland, when I came up from here in Oxfordshire to speak at Expo Scotland a few weeks ago. And as the Networking Retreat, I've got a couple of business partners as well, train people in networking skills. So that's me coming live and direct from all the way down here, south in Oxfordshire at the moment.
It's the beauty of the times that we're working and living through at the moment, that there's been a lot of negatives, a lot of downsides to coronavirus and COVID and the restrictions, but there's been some positives as well, I have to say. I suppose I'm one of those people that will always try and find the silver lining in every situation. This is a prime example. We're sitting probably 300 odd miles apart from each other, doing a bit of work together, no travel, no time wasted, no interruptions. So it really has, I think for all kind of business types, the marketing activity, the selling activity, the promotional activity, all the disruption we've been through for the last 14, 15 months actually has presented new opportunities, hasn't it?
Oh, completely it has. What is it today? It's March the 17th. So March the 16th in England last year, we all sat around and watched the television and watched Boris Johnson telling us what was going to happen. And I guess, rather like you, I actually had to think, what next? What does this mean for me? Because I run a business, I don't have a job. I had to look at where the opportunity was here. So much of my income at the time was derived from being out on the road, singing for my supper, turning up at events and speaking, getting paid for that, going on to the next one. And of course, all of those events shut down. So I had to think in that week really quickly about how I pivoted, to use the word that everyone's choosing to use now, into actually continuing to make an income. And what's been interesting about that is that you and I relied, because February 2020, I was up in Glasgow. That's the last time I saw you in real life. But you and I used to rely on my roughly 6 weekly trips to Glasgow to get together, to do stuff, to have all of our conversations. This technology existed, and it was, it was pretty good at the time. Yep. But being forced to use all of this has now meant that I spend, my partner's pointed out to me how much I'm saving, but, I'm saving hundreds of pounds a month on traveling. And as lovely as it is to come up to Glasgow and see you, we don't need to do that in order to have meetings and to have conversations like this. And so that has, that set other people thinking about new ways of doing networking. I've done interviews. I did one last week with 8 of us, where only a year ago, once again, even though the technology existed, we'd have probably all traveled to the same place to do it. But now this has opened up all of these opportunities to do things slightly differently.
Absolutely. It's I think I would be right in saying, Stefan, you're certainly one of the first people that introduced me to having meetings across Zoom. And,
wow, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think you're one of the first people that introduced me to that, simply because of the geographics. We used to see each other face to face every 6 or 7 weeks, as you say, and then we'd catch up in between occasionally. And it strikes me what you've just said, that most of the technology we're all using all the time now was around at that point in time. And I was certainly a reluctant adopter of particularly of Zoom and the likes. But just as you've described there, that kind of week, this time last year of, well, what now? What are we going to do now? And certainly when I reflect back 12 months, my business has completely changed. That all of my work, all of my conversations, my consultations, my coaching sessions are all done through this medium now. And I'm having really serious thoughts at the moment that I don't particularly want to go back to the old way of dashing around 400 and 500 miles a week in the car, spending all that money, all of that unproductive time. So I think we're going to see without being overly dramatic, a significant change in the way that business is done moving forward. I'm not saying I don't think we won't go back to working face to face, but if I take myself as an example, my intention is that face-to-face work, seeing somebody in the white of their eyes, will be the exception rather than the rule. What's your feelings on that? You thinking similarly or differently?
One of my clients here in Oxfordshire has got an international business, and he's called Rob. He recently said to me that until last March, it was completely normal for their team to send someone out to Berlin for a 2-hour meeting. And now they're doing it this way. The money saved, the time saved, the reduction of the impact on that member of the team's work-life balance, because that would have probably meant them being away for a night, 2 days away from the office and so on. And now that person can go into the office, work in the morning, do the 2-hour meeting with Berlin in the afternoon, and still do some work in the afternoon as well. And that's pretty much how I'm feeling, in as much as I had my first meeting at 9 o'clock this morning. That was 9 to 9:30. Then I did another meeting, 9:30 till 11. Then I've come on with you. And at 12 o'clock, I'm going to go for a walk. Probably, people talk about hustle and talk about we all have to work super hard. But one of the things that's really changed with me is the amount of time that I've got to look after myself, where I'm not spending 6.5 hours on a train up to Glasgow, for example, where I'm in control of my life and my health around that. And I've found other really quite pleasant ways to use the typically 15 or 20 hours a week that I was traveling. So not only is there the cost saving, there's the huge change in my work-life balance over the last year, plus there's the huge change to how I'm impacting on the environment, because my footprint on the environment, getting on planes to come up to Glasgow, getting on trains and so on, all of that is such a benefit that I can't see me going back to the same way of working. And when I've talked to people about networking events, about conferences and so on and so forth, the word hybrid is coming up so often now, where people are talking about having a networking event where some of the people attend by video, having conferences where you can either attend in person or you can still pay, but you can attend virtually and still see all of the speakers and so on and so forth. And what I've also spotted, and this will be really interesting, and I know your primary market is hospitality, it'll be really interesting for them and how they deal with that, is people are talking about hybrid ways of working. So I can't remember the big company, but a big organization talking about people working permanently now 2 days a week from home and 3 days a week in the office. People, salesmen who won't travel around quite as much.
Yep.
So therefore, the hospitality industry have really got to think about how they layer value to for and this isn't a pitch for me to get free stuff, by the way. For, what's going to make it attractive for us to come up and have a real life conference in Glasgow, Edinburgh, or wherever it happens to be. I think they've got to really start thinking that through, whilst we're all thinking we've all got better cameras and better sounds than we had a year ago. We're all making sure that we're lit properly now, whereas a load of us were sitting in the dark. We've all worked out how to use this better.
Yep.
So as we get back to real life, you know, for me to attend or network in Glasgow, I can do that now from here. So everyone who's organizing events, everyone who's in the hospitality sector and hosting events like that are going to need to think about, you know, what's going to get this guy to really want to travel up to Scotland to attend this event or to stay with us, whatever it happens to be. And I think that brings that has the potential to really let some of the cream in the industry rise to the top.
Now, Stefan, you raise an interesting point there about networking that I'd like to explore a bit more deeply with you. It's probably not the first time you've heard me say this. I consider, going back 7 or 8 years ago, I was probably the worst networker. No coincidence that coincided with kind of the end of my operational hotel career. And I recognize now I was very guilty. And funnily enough, I see other people making the same mistake now that I try and help them with. As a senior leader in hotel management, I'd sometimes go to networking events. I tended to try and avoid them because I didn't understand them. I didn't really know how they worked. So I would tend to send one of my sales execs, one of my more junior staff, to go along. And when I reflect back now, I was very guilty. They would step back in the business, and the first conversation with me would be, how did you get on? Who did you speak to? How many sales did you make? How many weddings or events have you sold? And I was so result orientated, so focused upon the end result of how many new customers have you got in. And of course, the answer invariably would be, well, I had a couple of conversations, but we didn't sell anything to anybody. It then became unlikely that I would send somebody back to that event because I'm immediately jumping to the conclusion, oh, that's a waste of time. You could have been in the office answering the phones during that period of time. Fast forward now to 2021, and I look back on those times and with frustration and irritation, but I know the mistakes that we were making was because I didn't understand how to make networking work for my business. And I suspect a number of people, particularly in my hospitality audience who are watching this, will understand the story that I've just described there. And they might actually look in the mirror and think, well, maybe I'm behaving a bit like that as well. You're one of the people who helped me to really understand the networking process, to understand how to make it work. What would be your kind of golden nugget of advice for people that might recognize that same behavior in themselves?
I think it's for people in the hospitality sector, there is when you turn up at a networking event, if you're expecting someone to buy from you at that event, you're expecting to be there in that micro moment when someone has just thought about organizing a conference or a training event and hasn't yet got a venue sorted out, or for someone in the room to be just about to organize a wedding or other family events. And actually, it's very unlikely that Wednesday morning or whatever it happens to be, that there's going to be someone in the room who's in that position. But if you spend the time actually getting to know the people in the room, then that will spin round. And at the moment when that person is thinking of organizing a wedding, or when that person starts to think, oh, I might do some training sessions and invite people along and so on, then they'll come up and say, Barry, I know you've got a venue. I've never organized an event before. How does it work? How much does it cost? And so on and so forth. Years and years ago, around 2008, I've been doing this for a long time now. Someone, I live down here in Oxfordshire. I was at a networking event in Oxfordshire, and someone from Milton Hill House, which was at the time a De Vere venue, started coming along to the networking events I was at. And 3 or 4 events in, she just said to me, have you ever seen our place? And I said, no, I haven't. And she said, well, come along and have a look. She said, I'll make sure the kitchen sorts you out lunch and you'll get the grand tour. And we've recently spent £3.5 million. I remember the numbers. And we went along, and a week after that, having looked at the venue and made noises and said, oh, it looks nice here and so on, the week after that, the venue that I was using for networking events, The staff were really rude to us. They weren't helpful on the morning. They didn't have breakfasts ready. And she could never have known that that was about to happen. But I picked up the phone and said, look, you know, it's not working with the existing venue anymore. Has Milton Hill House ever thought about doing networking events? And that turned into 8 years worth of networking events that I ran there. When I founded the networking retreats, I had this idea of people staying overnight. And since 2015, now I've run the networking event at Milton Hill House. And then to finish off that story, my sister got married in December 2019. And she looked at a lot of venues. And one of the things that tipped her using Milton Hill House was the fact that I knew all of the staff there. And I've no idea, but that certainly adds up to something like £100,000 worth of business to those guys in the last 12 or 13 years, which I know isn't massive, but it's certainly not insignificant. And I've no idea how many other people from the networking events that I took there and from the networking retreat have also used it for events and so on and so forth. So she was there. And by virtue of her coming along to the networking events that I was already at, she managed to be in the right place at the right time when I suddenly thought, yeah, that would be a great place to move our events to. But it wouldn't have happened the first time she came along. The other people that I have conversations with, lawyers and accountants, who will often send the junior partners out networking, and the first question they all get asked when they get back is, how many instructions have you won today? As if someone in the room was in that exact moment when they were about to change accountant or needed a lawyer. And life just doesn't work like that. Being in the right place at the right time is actually really easy. It just requires a little bit of effort from people. It requires actually thinking about, but no one in the room, or not many people in the room, are likely to be ready to buy from you today.
Yep. So
why not put yourself in the room at the networking event a little more often so that you've got a better chance of being there. And the return on investment from networking tends to be exponential. The longer you stick at it, the more and more you're involved in those conversations where people need your services, just as relevant to hospitality as it is to the rest of the world.